Hello, I Dr. Suman, Assistant Professor in Zoology from Government College for Girls, Sector 14, Gurugram, Haryana. This video lecture is being recorded as an initiative by the Directorate of Higher Education Haryana to record video lectures for undergraduate and postgraduate classes. In this lecture, I will be discussing about integration of endocrinology. There are four learning objectives of this lecture. First is introduction to the endocrinology, and second is structure and mechanism of hormone action. Third objective is classification of hormones, and fourth objective is physiology of hypothalamus. So now, what is endocrinology? The science of structure and function of the endocrine glands and the diagnosis and treatment of disorders of the endocrine system is known as endocrinology. So next is, what is the basic difference between exocrine and endocrine glands? Exocrine glands are those which secrete their product into ducts that carry the secretion into the body cavity, into the lumen of an organ, or to the surface of the body. Examples of exocrine glands include sudoriferous glands, sebaceous gland, mucous glands, and digestive glands. On the other hand, endocrine glands are those which secretes their products into interstitial fluid surrounding the secretory cells rather than into ducts. From the interstitial fluid, hormone diffuse into blood capillaries and blood carries them to the target cells throughout the body. In this slide, we can see the major endocrine glands of the body. Starting from the right, first is pituitary gland, that is anterior pituitary, posterior pituitary, thyroid gland, parathyroid gland, pancreas, adrenal cortex, adrenal medulla, and ovaries and testes. So these are the main endocrine glands in the body. In the previous slides, we have read the endocrine glands that secrete hormones. So what are these hormones? The hormones are nothing but they are the mediator molecule that is released in one part of the body but regulate the activity of cells in other part of the body. Most hormones enter interstitial fluid and then the blood stream. There are some general properties of hormones. They are synthesized and secreted by endocrine cells. They are non-nutrients and act as intracellular chemical messengers. Hormones do not provide energy or building materials but do have effect on growth, differentiation, and metabolic activity of target cells. Hormones are with different chemical structure so that they may be proteins, peptides, and steroids. The excess of or deficiency of hormones may cause disorders They may accelerate or inhibit specific physiological processes. They may be destroyed metabolically after their actions. They usually activate the target cells by forming hormone receptors. So, these are some general properties of hormones. Hormones are also secreted by major endocrine glands. This is the list of major endocrine glands and hormones secreted by them. First is anterior pituitary secretes growth hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, prolactin. Posterior pituitary secrete antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin. Thyroid secretes thyroxine, triiodothyronine, and calcitonin hormones, while parathyroid hormone secretes parathormone. On the other hand, the hormones secreted by pancreas are mainly insulin, glucagon, somatostatin, and pancreatic polypeptides. Adrenal cortex secretes mainly mineralocorticoids, and adrenal medulla secretes calci, catecholamines, adrenaline, and noradrenalines. Gonads also secretes hormones such as testes secrete testosterone, dihydrotestosterone, and androstenedione, and ovary secretes the major two hormones estrogen and progesterones. Second table is showing the list of local hormones present in the body such as serotonin, histamine, substance P, heparin, bradykinin, and gastrointestinal hormones. Other organs of the body also secretes many hormones like thymus secrete thymosin and thymine. Kidney secretes erythropoietin hormone, thrombopoietin, renin, and prostaglandins. Heart secretes atrial natriuretic peptide and brain natriuretic peptide. And pineal gland secretes the melatonin hormones. In the next slide, we will see the classification of hormones. With respect to their chemical nature, S.R. Griffin and J.B. Ojeda in 2000 classified hormones into three groups. First is steroids, second proteins, and third derivatives of tyrosines. Among steroids, cortisol, corticosterone, testosterone, dihydrotestosterone, androstenedione, estrogen, and progesterone are common hormones. Hormones with proteinaceous nature are growth hormone, TSH, ACTH, follicle stimulating hormone, prolactin, antidiuretic hormone, oxytocin, parathormone, calcitonin, and glucagon, etc. Third category includes derivatives of tyrosine, and examples are thyroxine, triiodothyronine, epinephrine, norepinephrine, and dopamine hormone. Next criteria for hormones classification is based on solubility. According to this, hormones are divided into two groups, so that lipid soluble and water soluble hormones. Steroids and thyroid hormones are lipid soluble, while amines, peptides, and proteins are water soluble hormones. Hormones have been classified in various subgroups such as based on nature of action, based on effect, based on stimulation of endocrine glands, and based on mode of action. Let's see these one by one. First is based on nature of action. They are divided into local and general hormones. Local hormones have specific local effects by paracrine secretion. Example is testosterone. On the other hand, general hormones are transported by circulation to the distal target organ or tissue. Examples are insulin and thyroid hormones, etc. Second is based on effect of hormones are divided into three categories: kinetic hormones, which are secreted by neural means and they may cause pigment migration, muscle contraction, etc. For example, a message and epinephrine, MSH, epinephrine are the example of this. Second is metabolic hormones, which mainly change the rate of metabolism and balance the reaction. Examples are insulin and glucagon, etc. Third category is morphogenetic hormones, which are involved in growth and differentiation. For example, follicle stimulating hormone and thyroid hormones. Next classification is based on stimulation of endocrine glands. According to this, there are two subcategories. First is tropic hormone, which are stimulate other endocrine glands for secretion. For example, TSH of pituitary stimulate secretion of thyroid gland. Second is non-tropic hormones, which exert their effect on non-endocrine target tissues. For example, thyroid hormone increases the oxygen consumption rate and metabolic activity of almost every cell. Next criteria of classification is based on mode of action. In this, there are two subcategories of hormone. First is quick acting hormones. These hormones initiate immediate response from their target cells. For example, protein and amine hormones. Next are short acting hormones, which initiate a delayed response. These hormones are small in size and they bind to the protein receptors present in the cytosol, and examples are steroid hormones of reproductive organs and adrenal cortex. Next is structure and mechanism of hormone action. Hormone does not act on the target cell directly. They combine with receptor to form hormone receptor complex. This complex execute the hormonal action by any one of the following mechanism. First may be by altering permeability of cell membrane, by activating intracellular enzyme, or by acting on genes. So let's see these one by one. Hormone receptors are situated either in cell membrane or cytoplasm or nucleus of the target cells as follows. Cell membrane, the receptor of protein hormones and adrenal medullary hormones are situated in the cell membrane. Second, the receptor of steroid hormones are situated in the cytoplasm of target cells, and receptor of thyroid hormones are in the nucleus of the cell. So now mechanism of action of hormones with intracellular receptors. In this mainly steroid and thyroid hormones comes. Hormones enter the target cell and bind to its receptor. The receptor may be in the cytoplasm or in the nucleus. But even if the receptor is in the cytoplasm, the hormone receptor complex enter the nucleus. The hormone receptor complex affects the expression of a gene. The effect is mediated through that part of the DNA which regulates the expression of the gene. The regulatory region of DNA has a part called hormone response element. The hormone response complex bind to the HRE. The binding influences the frequency with which transcription of the genes takes place. The frequency of transcription determines the amount of mRNA formed. The amount of mRNA formed determines the amount of protein coded by the gene that will be synthesized. If the protein is an enzyme, its amount will affect the rate of some chemical reactions in the cell. In this way, the hormone may affect some important activity of the target cell. Next is mechanism of action of hormones with cell membrane receptors. The peptide and amino acid derivative hormones except thyroid hormones have receptor located on the cell membrane of the target cells. In this, the hormone receptor complex stimulates an enzymatic reaction in the cell membrane. As a result, a substance called as second messenger is produced. The second messenger enters the cell and influences the function of target cell in a specific way. The hormone, which may be considered the first messenger, does not enter the target cell. Instead, it sends another molecule to transmit the message. Therefore, the molecule which enters the cell is called second messenger. The most common second messenger is cyclic AMP, which may affect metabolic reactions in the cytoplasm directly or by influencing gene expression like the steroid hormones. So, this is how the hormones show their effect. Next is physiology of hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is a small part of the brain of vertebrates animal. Despite its small size, the hypothalamus plays an important role in numerous day-to-day functional and behavioral activities essential for the survival of the animal. Its overall role is to collect and integrate a usual variety of information from the body and to organize neural and endocrine response that maintain homeostasis. The hypothalamus developed from the active dome of the embryo. Let's see its anatomy. The hypothalamus located below the thalamus, and it is a thin sheet of neural tissue found along the either side of front and of third ventricle of the brain. It provides anatomical connections between nervous and endocrine system. It is also known as control center or the supreme commander of endocrine glands, as it has a special structural and functional relationship with the pituitary gland. There are about 10 or 11 small indistinct nuclei packed into the hypothalamus. Some of the important nuclei in the hypothalamus are preoptic nucleus, anterior hypothalamus, posterior hypothalamic nuclei, ventromedial nucleus of hypothalamus, supraoptic nucleus, paraventricular nuclei, and suprachiasmatic nucleus, etc. Let's see some important efferent and efferent connections of hypothalamus. Efferent connections have various nuclei of hypothalamus brings a lot of efferent input or connection which are visible and asymmetric input through ascending tract, olfactory tract, cortico hypothalamic tract, hippocampus, thalamo hypothalamic tract, and tegmentum of midbrain. Efferent connection are hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract, mammaliothalamic tract. These tracts are neural, but hypothalamus is connected to anterior pituitary gland through hypothalamo-hypophyseal portal system. The rich efferent input explains the extensive influences that are integrated in the hypothalamus, and the prophyllic efferent output explains the widespread neuroendocrine effect of the hypothalamus. Hypothalamo hypophyseal relationships. The hypothalamus is intimately related to the both anterior and the posterior lobes of pituitary, the supraoptic and paraventricular nuclei, and some other neurons of the hypothalamus synthesize ADH and oxytocin hormone. These substances travel along the axons of these neurons, which terminate in the posterior pituitary. From the posterior pituitary, these hormones diffuses into the blood stream. Let's see some important functions of the hypothalamus. It plays an important role in the regulation of body temperature, in regulation of food intake, in regulation of body's water content, highest center for autonomic nervous system, endocrine control, role in reproduction, impact on sleep arousal and alert state. It acts as a biological clock. It has important role in emotional state and learning. We will see the endocrine function of hypothalamus in details in the next slide. Hypothalamus synthesizes two groups of hormones, releasing and inhibiting hormones, and vasopressin and oxytocin. Releasing and inhibiting hormones are synthesized in the hypothalamus and transported to the median eminence. On the other hand, vasopressin and oxytocin are synthesized by the neurons of the supraoptic and paraventricular nuclei of the hypothalamus. They are transported along their zones to the posterior pituitary. This slide is showing a list of hormones secreted by the hypothalamus and their pituitary hormones. Hypothalamus mostly releasing or inhibitory hormones, and they are either the decrease or increase the activity of target organs accordingly. For example, hypothalamic hormones are corticotropin releasing hormone, thyrotropin releasing hormone, gonadotropin releasing hormone, growth hormone releasing hormone, somatostatin, prolactin, and they act on hormones on the pituitary gland to increase or decrease the secretion of their respective target hormones. Next is regulatory role of hypothalamic and anterior pituitary hormones. So question arises, why the chain of hypothalamus pituitary target gland is necessary. The chain helps in regulating the level of hormone of the target gland by a feedback mechanism. An increase in the level of the target hormone, which inhibits the secretion of the corresponding pituitary or hypothalamic hormone, or both. Similarly, pituitary anterior pituitary hormone inhibits the release of hypothalamic hormone. In this way, the level of the target hormone is brought down. If it falls below normal, the same mechanism works in the opposite direction to bring up the level of the hormone. This is a classical negative feedback mechanism. This was end of the lecture. Let's see some short answer questions. Number 1, what is endocrinology? Second is name various type of glands in our body. Third is what are hormones? Fourth is why hypothalamus is called as the center of endocrine regulation. Name important nuclei of hypothalamus. The answer of all these questions can be seen from the previous slides. Let's see some multiple choice questions. Question number 1, water soluble hormone is options A proteins, B eicosanoids, C amino acids, and D all of the above. The answer is D all of the above. Question 2, endocrine gland is sudoriferous gland, sebaceous gland, parathyroid gland, and D mucous gland. The answer is C, that is parathyroid gland. Question number 3, steroid hormones have their receptors A intercellular, B intracellular, C both A and B, and D none of the above. The answer is steroid hormones have their receptors intracellular. Thank you.